Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. Today you're going to want to get yourself a cup of tea or just make yourself comfy because I have a feeling this is going to be a long one. This has taken me about a week to research fully and I still don't even think I've like scraped the surface. So this is going to be as much as I feel I can tell you in like 20-25 minutes. I don't even think I've got half of the information that you would probably want in here. So like I always say, if you've got any questions at all, then please feel free to put them in the comments down below and I'll answer it as best I can. I am worried. I've tried to make the story like flow as smoothly as I can in this one, but I'm still going to have to miss some stuff out because it's just mind-blowingly long. I'll also link stuff down below as I always do. So let's jump into it because long intro, long video. Okay, shut up, Georgia. Okay, so this is the story of the mystery of the Somerton Man, or you might know the case as Tamam Shud. This is a John Doe case. It's the story of an unidentified man who was found dead on a beach at 6:30 AM on the 1st of December 1948. There's two mysteries here. The first mystery is how he died and the second mystery is who he was. And to this day, nobody really has any solid answers on either of them. The Somerton Man was actually found by two horse riders on the beach that morning. They were I think they were working, they were riding their horse up the beach, about to take them back to the stables, and they come across this man. So they get off their horses, go over and lift up his leg, and his leg just falls stiff back down, and obviously they know he's dead straight away. And then somebody else comes along, and he says he'll handle it. The two riders go back to the stables. I think they were working, which is where they were in a rush to get back. And the man who found them called the police and all went down from there. So the Somerton Man was lying in the sand on the beach across from a crippled children's home. Nowadays it would never be called a crippled children's home, but that's what it was back then. He was lying sort of mostly in the sand, but his head was like propped up against the wall. I'll insert a picture of where he was found. The little X marks the exact spot where he was. So his head was lying against the seawall, he was extended out and his legs were, or his feet were crossed. And I'm just going to read from my notes about what he had on him because otherwise I'll never remember this. There was an unlit cigarette found on the right collar of his coat, and a search of his body revealed an unused second-class ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket from the city, a narrow aluminium American comb, a half-empty pack of juicy fruit chewing gum, an army cigarette packet containing 7, I think I've written conceitas, just 7 cigarettes, and a quarter full box of Bryant and Maine matches. So a load of witnesses come forward saying they had seen the man the night before, and one couple said they'd seen him about 7 o'clock the night before and he just lifted his arm up and like dropped it really limply, so at this point it is thought that he was still alive. Another couple saw him around 7:30, 8 o'clock. He didn't move the entire time they were there. They just assumed he was a drunk or he was asleep and didn't want to disturb him. One witness actually said that she saw the man there and she actually saw another man standing on top of the steps. So if you imagine the beach is here and then there's the seawall here and there's sort of steps leading up to like the land. So she saw somebody stood at the top of the steps just staring at the man. So of course a pathologist got involved. The pathologist on this case was John Burton Cleland. Warning you right now, you're about to see a photo of a dead man. There's nothing gruesome here. There's no like cuts, no blood, it's just a dead person, his autopsy photos, so don't want to see it, close your eyes now. So that's up there. The pathologist said that he was of Britisher appearance. He was 40 to 50 years old, he was 5'11", hazel eyes, he had fair to gingery hair but was slightly greying around the temples, broad shoulders, narrow waist. His hands and nails showed no sign of manual labour, which was quite rare in this time because it was just after the war and a lot of people had been like soldiers, been in the military and had done a lot of manual labour. His big and little toes pointed in a wedge shape, so they were sort of like pointed like that, and he had very pronounced calf muscles, not dissimilar to that of a ballet dancer. You know, ballet dancers have very specific body shapes, especially the men. He had very defined calf muscles, and his entire figure, like his broad shoulders, narrow waist, quite slender, led them to believe that he was a dancer of some kind. When he was found, he was dressed in a white shirt with a red and blue tie, brown trousers, socks, shoes, a brown knitted pullover, and a fashionable grey and brown double-breasted jacket. All the labels in the clothing had been removed, which is strange. He had no hat, which was very unusual for 1948. He had no wallet, no ID. clean shaven, and the fact that he had no ID originally led the police to believe that he had committed suicide. Oh, and of course they checked his teeth against all dental records in the country, and nothing came up at all, which probably indicated that he wasn't from Australia. Nobody knows where this guy was from, nobody at all, but there are a few pointers in this case which lead me to believe that he wasn't from Australia. His estimate time of death was 2 a.m. on the 30th of December 1948. The pathologist, sorry, I feel like I'm reading so much from this. I've got so much information in here about this case, I just cannot memorise it all. The pathologist said that his heart was very healthy, his pharynx was quite congested, blood was mixed with food in the stomach, both kidneys were congested, his liver contained excess of blood in vessels, his spleen was 3 times the normal size, he had acute gastritis, hemorrhage and brain congestion. So this guy wasn't a healthy guy. There's nothing saying any of this was the main cause of his death, but it definitely leads us to believe that he wasn't healthy at all. He probably was quite ill before he died. The autopsy showed that his last meal was a pasty, probably about 3 to 4 hours before his death. So they checked the contents of his stomach for anything dodgy. I think they were looking for poison. Because this guy had died for no particular reason, and poison was something they look at in autopsies, I suppose. They couldn't find any trace of anything. So we skip ahead in the timeline to 14th of July 1949. It's a new year and the Adelaide train station staff discover a suitcase. Now this suitcase was checked into the train station at 11 a.m. on the 30th of November 1948. So it's gone unclaimed for nearly a month and a half, and police immediately assumed that it was linked to the Somerton Man case. Now inside the suitcase were just regular clothes, sort of stuff you'd expect, dressing gowns, there were slippers in there, a change of trousers. The trousers actually had sand in the cuffs, which is a bit strange. Really weirdly, there were no socks in there at all, which I just find really strange. All of the labels had also been removed on all of these clothes, which is really strange. For most of these cases, when they find John Does, Jane Does, people that they can't identify, police usually go by their clothing to figure out from what area they've recently been in or what area they originate from. Because the clothing label, especially back in these days where it wasn't so much massive chains, it was just single shops, could tell you a lot about a person. But all of these clothes labels have been removed, apart from, weirdly enough, 3 items which had the label T Keen on them. Keane. That was the tie and a laundry bag that had T Keen on it, spelled like that. And then on a singlet there was Keen on it, but it's spelled Kean. Now the police found it very hard to believe that this person, or whoever had done it, had removed all of the labels from all of the clothes apart from these 3 items. So they never really paid much attention to the name T Keen because they thought it was put there to lead them on a manhunt or a goose chase. They don't actually think this person was anything to do with T Keen. Of course they did search for that name in all sort of English speaking countries all throughout Australia, the UK, the US, and nobody by the name T Keen had ever been reported missing, so that was a bit of a dead end anyway. But also in this case were a few weirder items. There was an electrician's screwdriver, a table knife cut down into a small sharp instrument, scissors with sharpened points, a small square of zinc which was thought to be used to sharpen these items, a stenciling brush, and a thread card of Barber brand orange waxed threads. It was a really unusual type of thread, and it was one that wasn't found in Australia at this time, which again leads police to believe that he was possibly coming from outside Australia. So this same thread had actually been used to sew up a hole in the trousers that the Somerton Man was wearing when he was found. I think that was the final piece in the puzzle that led the police to believe, yes, this is definitely this guy's suitcase. And we jump forward again to the 17th of June 1949. This is when the inquest was held. So one thing he noted in this inquest was that his shoes, the Somerton Man's shoes, were unusually clean. They had recently been polished. They were like spotless shoes. They're not the sort of shoes that you would have expected somebody to walk around like a city like Glenelg in all day. They were so clean they actually had a hard time believing this man was wandering around on the beach in these shoes, because they would have shown some signs of wear, they would have been sandy. Apparently they were just spotlessly clean, which is very strange. And this actually fitted with some other evidence at the time that the police believed that the Somerton Man hadn't actually died in that spot, he'd actually been like put there by somebody. There's a few things which lead me to believe that he wasn't put there by anybody, that he did die in that position and it wasn't so much foul play as in like direct murder. Just the fact that all the witnesses had seen him there the night before. If somebody killed him and dropped in that spot, he was clearly still alive because he was lifting his arm up and down at 7 p.m. I don't think that he was put there by somebody, but that's my own opinion. What do I know, really? So a professor, I think it's a professor from the University of Adelaide, testified that the Somerton man was poisoned. So he spoke of a small group of drugs that actually wouldn't show up in an autopsy if it was given in small doses. He said that even if you're looking for it, you wouldn't be able to really see these drugs. They're so fast acting and they get out of the body quickly. I think at the time they just didn't have the means to test for these sorts of drugs. They actually didn't reveal the names of these drugs until the 1980s. The professor at the time actually wrote it on a piece of paper and gave it to the coroner because he didn't want to say what drug it was out loud because it could actually be accessed very easily by the public. The professor actually said at the time the only thing that would lead him to believe that this wasn't a case of poisoning by these drugs was the fact there was no signs of vomit on or around the body at the time. In fact, the body was kind of untouched. The sand around him was undisturbed. He hadn't emptied his bowels, he hadn't emptied his bladder, he hadn't vomited. The contents of his stomach was still all there. He was in pretty good condition for a dead person. So to end the inquest, Cleland, the pathologist, actually stated that he would be prepared to find that he died from poison, not accidentally administered, which means he believed it was a murder or a suicide, but he can't say if it was administered by the deceased or by another person. However, despite saying this, he couldn't actually confirm that this was the cause of death. It was just very widely believed. But I suppose at an inquest you can't say something based off of, I have a hunch that this is what it is. You need to have solid evidence, and they didn't have that. So after the inquest, a plaster cast was actually made of the Somerton man, of his face and shoulders, and he was finally laid to rest. Now here's where we get to the interesting thing. You think any of that was interesting? It's getting more interesting. So around the time of the inquest, a little tiny rolled up piece of paper was actually found in his fob pocket in his trousers. Now if you think about jeans, you have the big pockets, don't you? And I'm pretty sure the fob pocket is just that tiny little pocket that is sometimes above the pocket. Do you get what I mean? I'll insert a picture of it here so you know what I mean. In that tiny little fob pocket was a rolled up piece of paper, and on the piece of paper were two words. The words were Taman Should. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Turns out it was Persian. So the police got in contact with some public library officials and they translated it for him. They said these words mean finished or ended, and it actually comes from a book called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The Rubaiyat was actually a book that was translated from Persian into, I think, loads of different publishers and made their own versions of it. I think each translation is slightly different. But the book that this ended up coming from was a book that was actually published in New Zealand around that time. On the back of the paper, so it was literally one-sided, there was nothing on the other side, which did immediately lead officials to believe that this was the end of a book, and also the fact that it literally meant finished. The police put out a massive appeal asking for people who had copies of this book, and a man actually came forward and said around the time that the Somerton man was found, he lived in Glenelg and he actually found a book in the rear footwell of his car, and it was the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. So sorry, I hate having to pronounce things that I don't know how to pronounce. I feel so inadequate. Now at the time he didn't link it with this guy's death. Why would he link a book being found with a man who was mysteriously found dead on a beach? He just didn't really think of it, but as soon as he saw this appeal from the police, he knew what it was, so he took it into the police. And of course, the end of the book, the last page, had the final words torn out. So inside the back of the cover, the police actually found indentations, but in the back of the book were two phone numbers, one that was currently in use and one unknown phone number, and a code. Now this code is the weird part. This is what really got people messed up. They had no idea what this was about. And of course, you find a dead guy, 6 months later, you find that he has a piece of paper in his pocket that means ended, and then you find the book, and the theme of the book is all about how to live your life to the fullest and end it with no regrets. And then in the back of that book you find some weird phone numbers and a really strange code. Obviously you're going to be paying a lot of attention to that code. Now so many people have tried to break this code. It's literally just a series of letters. Some of the letters are crossed out. I personally, and I think a lot of people across the internet have this same view, I don't think it was a code. I don't think it was anything really dodgy. I don't think it was anything like that. I personally believe it's what's called a mnemonic code. It's basically when you're trying to remember sentences, so you just remember the first letter of each word, and this is actually something that I used to do when I was like revising for my A-levels, I did English literature, and you have to remember full quotes. So instead of remembering quotes, I used to just remember the first letter of each word. And I think this is what this guy was trying to do. He was writing the book, trying to maybe memorise a passage from the book, or maybe a passage from the Bible. I'm not entirely sure what it was. Maybe it was a speech he was practicing. I do have a reason why I think this later, but I'll get to that. Now, here's where we get some actual, not suspects, but some other people involved. So the number belonged to somebody called Jessica Thompson. Her maiden name was Jessica Harkness. And she lived about 400 metres north of where the man was found in Glenelg. She was of course immediately interviewed by the police, and she didn't know anything about any dead man. The police believed her at this point, but they said to her, like, can you come and have a look at this cast of the man that we've got, just so you can confirm that you don't know who he is. Now, there's somebody called Gary Felter who actually wrote a book on this whole thing in 2002, and he interviewed Jessica for this book. Now, he said she was incredibly invasive, she didn't want to answer any questions, and he 100% believed that she knew who this guy was, and she just did not want to say. Even her daughter Kate to this day believes that her mother knew who this man was. So Jessica Thompson was shown the plaster cast by a detective sergeant at the local police force, and she said immediately, she's like, no, I don't know him. Apparently she literally took one glance at the plaster cast and turned away and was like, no, don't know him, and then refused to look back at it, which just to me it screams out the fact that she definitely did know who it was and definitely did not want to say. So a little background on Jessica Thompson. She worked as a nurse during the war. She was there up until 1945, I think, at a hospital in Sydney. Whilst in Sydney, she met somebody who also worked in the military called Alf Boxall, and she actually gave Alf a copy of the Rubaiyat herself. She wrote like a little love note in the front and signed it with the words Jestin, so Jes, which were all in capitals, Tyn. Actually, when all of this stuff like came out and it was all in the media, she didn't want to be identified by the media at all. She just wanted a quiet life. So the media used a lot of pseudonyms for her, and Jestin was one of the pseudonyms that they used. So after the war ended, her and Alf parted ways. She moved back to Melbourne and got married to somebody else. When Jessica was acting so shady about this guy that she definitely did know, the police immediately assumed that it would be Alf Boxall because she told them about him. And so they went on this massive search for Alf Boxall and found him alive. So this wasn't the guy. Alf actually did still have the copy of the Rubaiyat that Jessica had given him. He showed it to the police, and Tamam Shud was at the end just as it should have been. And here's where the story goes from facts to speculation. I could give you a load of names of people it could possibly be, but we don't know that it could possibly be any of these people, and there's no solid evidence to suggest that it is any of these people that I would say if I were to give you some suspects. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you two scenarios which I personally believe are most likely. The first scenario that we have is he was a spy. You hear a lot of stories about how spies get poisoned by enemy spies, and it's all like very under wraps and undercover, and obviously they'd know of poisons that wouldn't show up in autopsies and stuff like that. Of course there isn't any huge evidence suggesting this guy is a spy, it's just very widely speculated. Just the fact that he died under very mysterious circumstances, he didn't have any labels in his clothes, he had some very questionable objects in his suitcase. He had like sharpened scissors, a sharpened knife, like he had zinc, an electric screwdriver. It was so random. Spies would cut out the labels of their clothes and stuff, obviously, so they couldn't be traced. This was obviously just after the war, tensions were very high. I've already said a couple of times that I don't suspect this guy was Australian. He could potentially be a spy. Maybe he was a Russian spy, maybe he was a US spy, English spy, don't really know, but the theory is that he got poisoned slowly by enemy spies, and people actually say that it wasn't in the pasty that he ate before his death that he was poisoned by, it was actually in the cigarettes that he smoked. I also read a weird source that said that Jessica Thompson actually spoke fluent Russian, and these two were actually in some kind of weird thing. They were with Russian spies. I read that a couple of times, but then I read something from Professor Derek Abbott, who is a huge person on this case. He has researched everything, he is determined to find out who this guy was. He said that there was actually nothing founded the fact that Jessica spoke Russian. He's not sure where this rumour's come from. Of course they come from somewhere, it could be true, but I don't think it is. Even her kids said I'm pretty sure our mother didn't speak Russian. Also, the fact he had no ID on him was quite strange for the time. It was 1948, they were just fresh out of war. People did carry ID on them during this time, just so if something happened to them they could be identified, so it was very strange that he didn't have ID. Of course spies wouldn't carry ID with them. It's a very loose theory. This isn't my favourite one, to be honest, but that's something a lot of people think. And my second favourite story is the cute, soppy love story, which I want to believe with all my heart. There are a few holes in this, but hear me out. So there's no doubt that Jessica Thompson was linked to this man in some way. She definitely recognised him. The fact that he had a copy of the Rubaiyat, and she'd also previously given copies of the Rubaiyat to former lovers. It wasn't a common book around these times. Have you ever heard of it? I doubt it. So it wasn't a common book, so it was definitely linked to Jessica Thompson in more than one way. Now here is a cute little love story. Picture this. So the Somerton Man was a dancer. He was dancing in the ballet at the time, and it is very widely thought he was a ballet dancer. This is not me just like reaching for things. He was in the ballet in Melbourne dancing. He meets Jessica Thompson while she is also in Melbourne, and they meet, they have an affair. Now of course he's a dancer, he's touring, so he has to move away. Jessica gives him a copy of the Rubaiyat, scrawls her number in the back, and they part ways. And say this is the real deal, this would have happened around 1946. So they part ways, and Jessica is actually left, and she discovers that she is pregnant. And Jessica actually was pregnant. She gave birth to a healthy little baby boy in 1947, and she named him Robin. Now it is noticed that Somerton Man was quite old for a dancer. He was 40 to 45 years old. So chances are, if he was too old to be a dancer in this time, he probably had retired. But that doesn't mean he wouldn't still be touring with the company. He could just be doing backstage stuff. Maybe he is still dancing. So he falls ill, and he thinks about that beautiful 25-year-old woman that he met in Melbourne that time and thinks, I need to go back and see her. So he takes his copy of the Rubaiyat that she gave him and travels back to find her. He finds out that she's in Glenelg and gets to Glenelg, has the book, and feels ill. So he goes and lies down or sits down on the beach just to watch the sea for a bit, and passes away on the beach before he ever gets to go see Jessica. Like I said, there are a couple of holes in this story. Why did the book end up in the rear footwell of a car unless the person who found it is lying about where he found it? And also, why would Jessica deny that she knew this man so much? This implies that could be the fact she was ashamed. She actually didn't end up getting married to her fiance. I think his name was Prosper Thompson, until 1949. So I think she got married pretty quickly because she wanted to hide the fact that she had a baby out of wedlock, and he was recently divorced. So the two of them rushed into a marriage. I think they did go on to have more children. But maybe Jessica was like, I can't admit to knowing this guy, like I can't let people think I had a child out of wedlock. So she just kept quiet and denied it for the rest of her life. She actually died in 2007. Now I mentioned Professor Derek Abbott earlier in this, but he has a couple more like leading theories on this. He's been researching this since, I want to say since 2009. I might be making that up. Good chance I'm making that up, but that's the number that's sticking in my head. So he's been researching this for a few years now, and he actually believes that the Somerton Man's death wasn't as sinister as people would like to believe. Now his leading theory into the Somerton Man's death is that he actually died of positional asphyxia. So the way that the Somerton Man was lying with his head sort of propped up like this and his body was straight out in front of him, if you try and lie like that, you feel pressure on your windpipes and you do struggle to breathe. And especially if the Thompson Man was already ill, he wasn't great inside, if he did have some medical problems, maybe just his positioning, he was tired, maybe he fell asleep and he just suffocated himself. And this sounds crazy, but this actually happens. You hear a lot of stories of old people, elderly people being found in their homes, heads up against their cabinet in the kitchen. And one of the reasons he believes this is actually for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier: no disturbance in the sand, no bowel emptying, no bladder emptying, no sickness. Like, these are all signs. Like, if they'd all been emptied, maybe he had been poisoned, but simple suffocation wouldn't lead to any of that. And that's also why he quite strongly believes that there was no murder or suicide involved, it was just a simple death. Now, Professor Abbott really wants to do a DNA test on the Somerton Man, and the Thompson family who really want him to do it as well. Like I said, Jessica died in 2007 and her son Robin actually passed away 2 years later in 2009. If you look at photos of Robin when he was alive, I think you can quite clearly see a resemblance between the two of them. I don't know if it's just me seeing it because I want to see it, but I definitely think you can see similarities in their facial features. I do believe that Robin was the Somerton man's son, and I think Jessica was just so ashamed she never wanted to admit to it. Robin actually ended up becoming a professional ballet dancer. Apparently he had an innate talent, he was such a good dancer. And what was the Somerton man thought to be? A ballet dancer. There's some things like that that just travel through DNA. So Professor Abbott really wants to exhume the Somerton man to get his DNA, and he says that they'd get the best DNA off of his teeth, because most likely he's in pretty bad decay now. It's been a good like 60 something years, hasn't it? However, Australian laws actually say you can't exhume someone once they've been buried, apart from in like 2 conditions. One of the reasons is if you're a soldier or like a long lost soldier, they can dig up your body to do DNA tests. And the other reason, I can't remember what it was, it might have been cases of murder and stuff like that, but because they can't confirm that the Somerton man was murdered, they weren't allowed to dig them up. However, I do believe pretty strongly if they dug up the Somerton man and got his DNA, I reckon he'd be a match for Robin, because I think he is Robin's dad. And I also believe that potentially the Somerton man's name could be some sort of variation on Robin. It could even be Robin, maybe Robert, something like that. Of course, if it is confirmed he's Robin's dad, then it doesn't really solve much. It sort of solves how he was connected to Jessica Thompson, but it doesn't say how he died, it doesn't say who he was. But it shows that he was someone, and it's a crazy, crazy mystery. It is. But let me know what you think. Like I said, I don't even think I've scratched the surface on this mystery. There is so much. If you're interested, please read all the comments down below. Any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm going to try something new here also, by the way, guys, if this video isn't already long enough. I know you can do polls on YouTube videos now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a poll up, and if you all vote, you can vote on which person, which true crime case you want me to talk about in next week's video. So get that poll up if I can do it. I'm sure it's up here somewhere. There, maybe there's a P up there somewhere, maybe there. Try it, vote, who do you want me to talk about next week, or if it's not in the options, then just comment it down below, tell me people. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Please make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'm getting into the hang of this whole midweek mystery thing, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.